Judge mocked Black Boy for saying that his father was a SEAL, then froze when he walked in with the unit. The laughter echoed through the courtroom like a wave of contempt. Judge Harrison Mitchell couldn't contain himself as he listened to the words of the 15-year-old boy sitting on the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she held a crumpled piece of paper. "Let me get this straight, young man," said the judge, removing his glasses theatrically and wiping the lenses with a condescending smile. "Are you telling me that his father, a black man from the outskirts of Detroit, is a Navy SEAL? One of the most highly trained elite soldiers in the world?" Tyler Washington kept his chin up, even as tears threatened to fall. "Yes, sir. My father has served for 12 years. He can't talk about his missions, but I know he's a hero." The social services attorney, Sandra Chen, sighed heavily. "Your Honor, the minor has clearly been instructed to fabricate this story to avoid being placed with a foster family. The biological father abandoned the family 3 years ago and has never been heard from since." "That's a lie," Tyler shouted, jumping out of his chair. "My father didn't abandon me. He's on a secret mission. He called me last week from a secure phone." The judge banged his gavel with excessive force. "Young man, sit down immediately. This is a serious courtroom, not a theater for her childish fantasies." The boy had lost his mother in a car accident 6 months ago. Since then, he had been living with his elderly grandmother, who was battling aggressive cancer. The system wanted to place him in foster care on the grounds of parental abandonment, but Tyler knew the truth that no one wanted to hear. "Boy," the judge continued, her voice laden with sarcasm, "I served 25 years in the Navy. I personally know commanders of SEAL units. There is no soldier named Derek Washington in their ranks. And even if there were, do you really think a man with that level of responsibility would abandon his son for 3 years?" "He didn't abandon me," Tyler repeated, her voice firmer now. "You don't understand how classified operations work." "Classified operations?" The judge laughed again, followed by a few court officials. "What kind of action movie have you been watching, kid? Save those stories for his schoolmates." Tyler had arrived at court that day with a briefcase containing letters, old photos, and a special cell phone that only received calls from encrypted numbers. 4 years, he had kept these items like treasures, knowing instinctively that one day he would need them to prove that his father was not the abandoner everyone believed him to be. The state-appointed lawyer, a man weary from decades of similar cases, didn't even look up from his documents. "Your Honor, I suggest we proceed with foster care placement. The minor is clearly in denial about his father's abandonment." But there was something in Tyler's eyes that didn't match the usual despair. A strange serenity, as if he were keeping a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. While everyone mocked his words, he nervously touched a small military brooch pinned to his shirt lapel, a symbol that very few people in the world would recognize. If this story of courage and truth has touched you, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple moment of humiliation would turn into the most shocking revelation that court had ever witnessed. Tyler's public humiliation was far from over. Judge Mitchell leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the spectacle he had created, while other court officials exchanged amused glances. "You know what, young Washington," said the judge, removing his glasses and cleaning the lenses with a theatrical gesture, "my military experience has taught me to recognize liars. And you, my boy, are blatantly lying to this court." Tyler felt the heat rise to his neck, but he kept his posture straight. Inside the briefcase he held tightly was a letter dated 2 years ago, signed by the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. But he knew it wasn't time to reveal it yet. "Let me explain something about the Navy SEALs," Mitchell continued, now in a condescending, professorial tone. "There are 350 men worldwide. 350 of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. I have personally met Admiral Thompson, who has overseen these operations for 20 years. The minor was clearly instructed by someone to invent this fantastical story to avoid the adoption process." "My father didn't instruct me to do anything," Tyler replied, her voice gaining a firmness that surprised everyone in the room. He taught her to always tell the truth, even when people refused to believe her. The judge laughed openly. Oh, how touching. And where exactly is this heroic father? Why does he never show up when you need him? Why does he abandon his son for 3 years without giving a single explanation to the school, the doctors, social services? Tyler closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the last call he had received from his father. The distant voice, with satellite interference, explaining that the mission had been extended indefinitely. That he couldn't give details, but that he would be back as soon as possible. That he loved him more than anything in the world. My father didn't abandon me, Tyler repeated, this time looking directly into the judge's eyes. You don't understand what it means to serve your country in operations you don't even know exist. Operations I don't even know exist. Mitchell slammed his fist on the table. Kid, I commanded destroyers in the Persian Gulf. I've been on classified operations you can't even dream of. And I can guarantee you there is no Derek Washington in the U.S. Special Forces. What the judge didn't know was that Tyler had grown up listening to telephone conversations in military code. He had memorized identification numbers, names of naval bases, and even communication frequencies that his father occasionally mentioned during quick calls. For years, he had kept this information as a secret treasure, without fully understanding its importance. Sandrachun took advantage of Tyler's moment of silence. Your Honor, it is clear that the minor was indoctrinated by someone in the community to create this narrative. Perhaps his own grandmother, who clearly does not have the physical or mental capacity to care for a child. Leave my grandmother out of this, Tyler said, her voice carrying an authority unusual for a 15-year-old. She is the strongest woman I know, and it was her who taught me that true men protect those they love, even when it means sacrificing everything. The judge raised his eyebrows. How dramatic. And I suppose she also told you that his father is saving the world on secret missions. Actually, Tyler replied calmly, it was my grandmother who taught him how to recognize liars. And she taught him that sometimes the truth has to wait for the right moment to be revealed. There was something in the way Tyler said these words that caused the atmosphere in the room to change subtly. An awkward silence fell over the courtroom, as if everyone had unconsciously realized they were missing something important. Mitchell, however, interpreted the silence as victory. Very well, young man. Since you insist on this fantasy, I'll give you a chance. If his father is really a Navy SEAL on a secret mission, surely he has some proof. Some document, some military ID, something that proves this absurd story. Tyler nervously touched the military pin on her lapel, a small symbol his father had given her years ago, saying it was to protect her until she could return home. The girl had never researched its meaning, but she knew instinctively that it was important. I have proof, Tyler said, her voice low but firm. More proof than you can imagine. Then show it. Mitchell exclaimed, banging his gavel. I'm tired of this charade. Show us this imaginary proof or admit that you're lying to this court. Tyler slowly opened the folder, removing a few carefully organized documents. But before he could speak, he looked up at the judge with an expression that mixed determination with something else, something that made Mitchell shift uncomfortably in his chair. Are you sure you want to see this evidence here, in front of everyone? Tyler asked. Because once I show you what I have here, there will be no turning back. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside Tyler that his oppressors couldn't see, a silent strength fueled by the very injustice he tried to impose. What those privileged people didn't know was that each act of contempt was writing his own sentence of defeat, and that the boy before him held secrets too powerful to be ignored much longer. Tyler took a deep breath and opened the folder completely, removing the first document. It was a faded photo of 15 men in military uniform, all in perfect formation at a naval base that was clearly not American. In the lower right corner, an almost illegible signature, Derek Washington Bravo Team, Classified Operation. An old photo proves nothing, said Sandrachun, leaning in to examine the image. Anyone can get military photos on the internet. But there was something about the photo that made Judge Mitchell lean forward slightly. The uniforms were not standard American, and the partially visible insignia suggested a specialized unit he had never seen in his 25 years of service. Tyler placed the second item on the table, a modified satellite phone with a retractable antenna and digital display showing active military frequencies. My father called me from this phone last week at 11:42 p.m. The call lasted exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds, standard time for security communications in the zone of operations. Operational zone. The judge laughed, but her laughter sounded forced. Kid, you have no idea what you're talking about. Frequency Delta 77 Alpha, Tyler continued, ignoring the interruption. Direct communication via military satellite. Standard NSA Level 5 encryption. He always uses the same security codes at the end of his calls. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. Mitchell stopped laughing completely, his eyes fixed on the phone that was clearly not ordinary civilian equipment. Sandrachan frowned, realizing that these specific technical details did not seem like the invention of a teenager. Tyler took advantage of the hesitation and continued. Operation Trident Neptune, completed in 2019. Operation Silent Anchor, 2020. Operation Deep Current, still ongoing since 2021. Each name came out of her mouth with military precision, as if she had been trained to memorize them. Enough! Mitchell slammed his fist on the table with excessive force. I don't know where you got this information, but this is theater. You're trying to fool this court with elaborate fantasies. What the judge didn't know was that Tyler had spent years listening to his father's phone conversations, initially without understanding their importance. But gradually, he had begun to research military terms, communication frequencies, and even names of operations that occasionally leaked onto specialized websites. He had unwittingly become an expert in classified military communications. His Honor, Sandrachan interjected, I suggest we end this charade. The minor has clearly been trained by someone to repeat these technical terms. That doesn't change the fact that his father has been absent for 3 years. Tyler looked directly at the judge, her voice taking on an authority that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. Sir, with all due respect, you served on destroyers in the Persian Gulf. You know standard naval communications, conventional security protocols. But you've never worked with integrated special operations units, which operate outside traditional military channels. The accuracy of the information made Mitchell gulp. How on earth did a 15-year-old kid from the suburbs of Detroit know about such specific military communication protocols? His father explained to him, Tyler continued, that people like him, even with respectable military experience, don't have access to information about experimental units. That's why you won't find the name Derek Washington in conventional Navy records. Tyler then removed the third item from the folder, an official letter on letterhead, with stamps and signatures that looked too official to be forged. The date was 2 years ago, and the header read, Naval Special Warfare Command, Classified Operations. This letter confirms the indefinite extension of my father's mission due to unforeseen operational circumstances, Tyler read aloud. Signed by Commander Richardson, Naval Special Warfare Group 2. Sandrachan quickly approached. Let me see that. She examined the letter carefully, looking for signs of forgery, but the paper watermarks and seals appeared genuine. It was then that Tyler realized he had won his first small victory. Utter skepticism had given way to uncertainty. The people in the room were no longer laughing, they were confused, trying to process information that did not fit his preconceived expectations. Judge Mitchell leafed through the letter several times, clearly disturbed. As a retired naval officer, he recognized the authenticity of the document's formal elements, but his mind refused to accept the implications. Even if this is true, Mitchell said, returning the letter with slightly trembling hands, it still doesn't explain 3 years of total absence. Where are the regular phone calls? The visits? The consistent contact that any responsible father would maintain? Tyler touched the small military pin on her lapel again, a gesture that had become almost unconscious. "Sir, may I ask a question?" "You may," Mitchell replied, though her voice betrayed growing irritation. "During your operations in the Persian Gulf, did you maintain daily contact with your family? Did you call home every week? Did you explain details of your missions to civilians?" The question hit Mitchell like a physical blow. During his own periods of active duty, he had gone months without outside communication, especially during sensitive operations. His own family had suffered from these prolonged absences. "That's different," he muttered, but her conviction was clearly shaken. Tyler noticed the hesitation and decided to apply more intense psychological pressure. "My father taught me that military sacrifice is not just for the soldier, but for the whole family. That sometimes loving someone means being willing to be misunderstood in order to protect something greater." For a moment, the courtroom fell completely silent. Tyler had turned the narrative around. He was no longer a boy making up stories about an absent father, but a young man defending a father who served his country in extraordinary circumstances. Sandra Chun, realizing she was losing control of the situation, decided to intensify her attack. "Your Honor, even if we temporarily accept this fantastical story, it does not change our responsibility for the child's well-being. A father on indefinite secret missions cannot provide emotional or financial stability." "Financial stability?" Tyler repeated, an almost imperceptible smile appearing on his lips. "Can I show you that too?" He took one last document out of his briefcase that made everyone in the room freeze completely. It was a bank statement in Derek Washington's name, showing regular monthly deposits into a joint account with Tyler. The amounts were substantial, much more than an ordinary soldier could receive. "My father never abandoned me financially," Tyler said, his voice now carrying a wounded dignity. "These deposits have been coming in on the 15th of every month for 3 consecutive years. They were used to pay for his school expenses, his grandmother's medical care, and our basic living expenses." Mitchell studied the bank statement, her hands trembling slightly. The numbers didn't lie. Someone was consistently funding this boy's life, and the amount suggested a specialized military source of income. "Furthermore," Tyler continued, pulling out his own cell phone, "I have recordings of his calls. 17 calls in the last 6 months. I can play any of them." Before anyone could protest, Tyler played an audio file. The voice that came out of the speaker was clear, mature, laden with military authority. "Tyler, son, I'm sorry I can't be there for your birthday. The mission has been extended for another 6 weeks. Take care of her, keep studying, and remember what we talked about regarding keeping our secret. I love you more than anything, kid." The emotional authenticity of the recording was undeniable. It was impossible to fake that tone of paternal affection mixed with military discipline. Tyler turned off the audio and looked directly at the judge. "My father didn't abandon me, sir. He is serving his country in a way that you don't fully understand, but that doesn't mean that he is not fulfilling his responsibilities as a father." Something had definitely changed in the atmosphere of the room. Tyler was no longer seen as a desperate boy making up stories. He had become a force to be reckoned with, someone who possessed information and evidence that challenged all initial assumptions. Judge Mitchell leaned back in his chair, clearly disturbed. In 30 years of legal practice, he had never faced such a complex situation. Every professional instinct told him to dismiss the story as teenage fantasy, but the evidence presented was disturbingly convincing. For a moment, everyone was completely silent. Tyler, still unconsciously touching the military brooch, maintained an upright posture that seemed to have been trained by years of family military discipline. There was something in his eyes that did not match the usual vulnerability of teenagers in court, an unshakable confidence of someone who knew exactly where he stood. What those privileged people failed to realize was that each attempt at humiliation only revealed deeper layers of a truth that would soon be impossible to ignore. Tyler still held two final secrets that would transform that courtroom into something very different from what anyone expected, and her strategic patience was about to be rewarded in a way that would leave everyone speechless. Tyler touched the small military pin one last time, his fingers tracing the outline of the symbol he had carried for years without fully understanding its true power. "Sir, may I ask one more question before I show you my final piece of evidence?" "What question?" Mitchell replied, her voice betraying her fatigue and growing irritation. "Do you know the meaning of this symbol?" Tyler removed the pin from his lapel and placed it on the judge's desk. It was small, unassuming, but there was something in his design that made Mitchell lean in to examine it more closely. The symbol combined traditional naval elements with insignia that did not appear in conventional military manuals. Mitchell frowned, her naval experience partially recognizing the elements, but unable to identify the specific combination. "I've never seen this particular symbol," Mitchell admitted, reluctantly returning the pin. Tyler smiled for the first time during the entire hearing. "That's because this symbol identifies families of operators of top-secret experimental units. His father gave it to him when he was 10, saying it was to protect him until he could come home." Sandrachan laughed nervously. "Now we're going to pretend military pins are proof of something? That could have been bought at any military surplus store." "It could," Tyler agreed calmly. "But this particular pin has a special feature." He took out his phone and typed in a sequence of numbers. "When you press the specific combination on the back, he activates a military emergency signal that can only be answered by the corresponding unit." Tyler pressed an almost invisible sequence of dots on the back of the pin. A high-pitched, low-frequency sound, almost imperceptible, echoed briefly through the room. "That doesn't prove anything," Mitchell said, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "It will prove something in about 5 minutes, Tyler replied, glancing at his watch. "When the emergency signal is activated, the corresponding unit has a mandatory immediate response protocol. My father taught me that I should only use it in the event of a real threat to my safety." A heavy silence fell over the room. Tyler calmly put all the documents back in the folder, organizing them with military precision that clearly mirrored her familiar training. Her demeanor had completely changed. She was no longer a desperate teenager defending an unlikely story, but someone executing a carefully prepared plan. "You've spent this entire morning trying to convince me that my father abandoned me," Tyler said, her voice taking on an authority that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. "You tried to make me believe that I was making up stories, that I was just a confused kid from the suburbs with fantasies about military heroes." Sandrachan checked her watch nervously. "Your Honor, I suggest we end this charade. The minor is clearly upset and—" Her words were interrupted by a distant but unmistakable sound, the noise of heavy military vehicles rapidly approaching the courthouse. Mitchell stood up instinctively, her military experience recognizing the sound of an operation in progress. "What the hell?" Mitchell muttered, walking to the window. Tyler remained seated, completely calm. "That's 4 tactical vehicles, probably 16 operators. Standard protocol for a familiar emergency response." The noise of the vehicles stopped abruptly outside the building. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed through the court hallways, rapidly approaching the courtroom. Mitchell returned to his chair, his face pale in a way Tyler had never seen in an adult. "That's impossible," Sandrachan whispered, but her hands trembled as she unnecessarily organized papers. The courtroom door opened with absolute military authority. Derek Washington entered first, her presence commanding immediate attention even before anyone noticed her uniform. He wasn't particularly tall, but there was something about her posture and movements that made the entire room seem smaller. Behind her, 15 Navy SEALs entered in perfect formation, her uniforms impeccable, faces impassive, movements synchronized like a well-oiled military machine. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Mitchell stood automatically, his military training overriding her judicial authority. Sandrachan remained frozen in her chair, her mouth slightly open, unable to process what she was witnessing. Derek Washington stopped at a respectful distance from the judge's bench and saluted perfectly. Commander Derek Washington, United States Navy SEALs, reporting in response to the family emergency signal, sir. Tyler rose calmly and walked over to his father. Dad, she said simply, her voice carrying 3 years of pent-up longing. Derek looked at his son, and for a brief moment, his military discipline faltered, replaced by pure paternal love. He placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder, a small gesture that communicated volumes about the bond between them. Status report, son, Derek said, her voice maintaining its military tone but with evident affection. Tyler pointed to the judge and the lawyer. They tried to convince me that you abandoned me, Dad. They said Navy SEALs like you don't exist, that I was lying to the court. Derek Washington turned her attention to Mitchell, and the judge literally took a step back under the weight of that gaze. Is that true, sir? Did you tell my son he was lying about my service? Mitchell swallowed hard, her previous arrogance completely evaporated. I had no knowledge of classified operations. Had no knowledge, Derek repeated, her voice carrying a cutting coldness. So you assumed my 15-year-old son was lying rather than admit the limitations of his own military knowledge? One of the SEALs in formation stepped forward. Commander, authorization documents for classified disclosure arrived 20 minutes ago. Operation Green Trident has been officially declassified for the purposes of this hearing. Derek nodded and removed a sealed folder from inside her military jacket. Judge Mitchell, these documents confirm my participation in classified special naval operations over the past 3 years. They include congressional authorization for limited disclosure due to the circumstances of this hearing. Mitchell accepted the folder with visibly trembling hands. As he read, his face gradually changed from skepticism to surprise, then to something close to horror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. The operations described in these documents, Derek continued, required prolonged absence from my family with limited communication for reasons of national security. At no time did I abandon my son. On the contrary, every mission I accepted was motivated in part by the desire to build a safer world for him. Commander Washington, even accepting the veracity of these documents, there are still questions about family stability and, Derek Washington turned to her with an expression that made the words die in her throat. Ma'am, my son has shown more courage, integrity, and loyalty today than many soldiers who have served under his command. He has protected classified information, kept faith with her family, and faced systematic disbelief with unshakable dignity. If there is anyone in this room whose character should be questioned, it is not his. Tyler watched the complete transformation of the dynamics in the room. The judge who had mocked him now couldn't maintain eye contact. The lawyer who had suggested that he was being indoctrinated now nervously organized papers, avoiding any direct confrontation. Dad, Tyler said quietly, can I go home now? Derek smiled, and this time there was nothing military about the expression. It was pure paternal joy. Yes, son. You can go home. As father and son headed for the exit, followed by the SEAL unit in perfect formation, Tyler paused at the door and looked back one last time. Mitchell remained standing behind her desk, the military documents still in her trembling hands, her judicial authority completely shattered by the reality she had refused to accept. What those privileged people finally understood too late was that they had spent hours trying to break the spirit of a young man whose strength came from a source she could never comprehend. The unwavering love of a hero who served his country in the most dangerous places in the world, but who never, even for a second, forgot that her most important mission was to be a father. 2 months later, Tyler walked through the halls of her new military prep school, one of the most prestigious in the country. His acceptance had not only been accepted, but accompanied by a full scholarship offered by the Naval Special Warfare Command itself. Congratulations on your entrance exam, said the principal, shaking his hand firmly. We've never seen such impressive results in military strategy from a 15-year-old. Derek Washington watched proudly from the sidelines, now permanently based in Norfolk as chief instructor of the new integrated training program. Her experimental unit had become the model for all future special operations, and he himself had been promoted to senior commander. Meanwhile, Judge Harrison Mitchell faced a full federal investigation. The video of that hearing, officially recorded for the court archives, had been leaked and gone viral nationwide. Her forced retirement was accompanied by an investigation into systematic bias in her previous judicial decisions. Sandra Chun had lost his license to practice family law after a devastating review of his past cases. The recording revealed a consistent pattern of discrimination against minority military families. "Dad," Tyler said, adjusting the military uniform he now wore with pride, "do you think they learned anything?" Derek smiled, watching the son who had transformed from a victim of prejudice into a national symbol of youthful courage. "Son, sometimes people need to be confronted with their own ignorance in order to grow. The important thing is that you never doubted the truth." Tyler touched the military pin, now permanently sewn onto his school uniform. "Thank you for teaching me that honor is not something others can take away from you." "No," Derek replied, "honor is something you carry regardless of who believes in it or not." That afternoon, Tyler received an early admission letter to West Point, accompanied by a personal note, to the young man who proved that courage has no age, and that truth needs no permission to exist. The best revenge against prejudice was not to destroy those who humiliated him, it was to build a life so extraordinary that it made it impossible to ignore his worth. Tyler learned that when you know your truth and defend it with dignity, even the most powerful are forced to recognize her greatness. Have you ever faced moments where no one believed in him? Sometimes the greatest victory is simply to continue being who he is, even when the whole world says he's wrong. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that truth always finds its way to the light.